anybody who was anti-Indira at that time, 71, 72, 73,
Right.
was a total no-no, as if I become anti-Modi these days. There was a hegemonic presence of Indira ji with a great progressive image, and she had taken some progressive steps. The entry of someone like me into the field of studying society and culture, and then gradually becoming not only a student and researcher of sociology, but also a teacher of sociology in the first phase of our churning, that was late 60s, early 70s, is very fascinating period. The post colonial Indian people like us were full of complaints about our rulers, about our system, because we were born at the dawn of freedom. So we thought that sky is the limit. And why are we going so slow? We had witnessed as adolescents uh, famine and drought between 64 and 66. Nearly every family of our country was forced to queue up for borrowed wheat and rice from America and Australia and everywhere else. And we were also a nation humiliated by our neighbor in 1962. Then we are very angry with the stories of corruption and inefficiency of our governments, the state governments, central government. And of course, we were very excited to engage with the project of change and progress, because that was the theme song of the whole nation, maybe the whole generation. I was a graduate student of sciences. I was at Banaras Hindu University. And as it was in those times, the mark of being intelligent and uh, smart as a high school student was that you study science. And if you went for other subjects, humanities and social sciences, that means you are a bit weak, particularly in mathematics, in English, in reason, in logic. Your brain power is insufficient. So that peer group pressure also pushed me from a very historical school called Central Hindu School, which was established by Annie Besant and Dr. Bhagwan Das, much prior to the formation of Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi. We moved to Banaras Hindu University as a group. We grew up with the stories of freedom struggle and great thinkers like Dr. Bhagwan Das, Acharya Narendra Dev, of course, great leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, Jayaprakash Narayan, Raman Lohia. They were part of our family memories. So, with the growing stress in our environment, that is in the late 60s, I became involved as a graduate student of sciences in protest movements. I also got attracted to the ideology of socialism, democratic socialism, but a non-Nehruvian variety, anti-Nehru kind of streak or trajectory developed by the tradition of Narendra Dev, Jayaprakash, and Lohia. So by 1968, 69, I also got arrested as part of a big student rebellion about about national language policy. They proposed to continue compulsion of English in schooling and colleges beyond the constitutional promise of 15 years. It was called Angreji Hatao Andolan. When I went to jail with several hundred students of BHU, and it was a nationwide protest, particularly covering East India and North India. In the jail times, I also got to review my own future possibilities. And I thought that science can wait. I must know a little more about the politics of our time. And but then I was only a student of BSc second year, and I was studying chemistry, geology, geography. They were all experimental subjects where you have to put in a lot of hours in laboratory. And our time was my personal time was divided between protest activities and practicals in the laboratories of chemistry and geology and geography. I was told by my family that no matter what you do, you have to complete your studies, because my grandfather had boycotted his school, and there was a legacy of boycott in the family. But then I was told that boycotting totally is not a good idea. Look at the leaders of even Gandhi's time, and Gandhi himself was a very well educated leader. So there is no escape from studying. Yes, if you don't want to study science, that's okay. So after doing my BSc, I decided to explore sociology. It looked that if you want to be an activist and an honest citizen, you must earn your bread while you do your social work. And there was a role model around us through law. There were many people who were doing good work without being party whole timer. I never wanted to become a whole timer because I grew up in an environment where there were a lot of whole timers around, my uncles, my father, my grandfather, and they all had mixed feelings about politics of uh, total protest or whole time politics. So it was clear that I must have an honest, clean, personal basis for survival. So what do you do? I came from family of teachers, and it looked that teaching may be a safe passage. And Acharya Narendra Dev emerged before me as my role model, who was a great scholar, second to none in training, and at the same time, one of the finest national leaders, founder of Congress Socialist Movement, and an intellectual who wrote simultaneously about national movement as well as Buddhism. So Acharya Narendra became the role model to be pursued. As a result, when I contested for presidency as a socialist candidate, I had an unfortunate combination to face. That was the Student Congress and Vidyarthi Parishad. They joined their hands that no matter what, this man should be defeated, because if he gets elected, he'll radicalize the campus life. He's already quite a troublemaker. And I lost it very narrowly, but that was a blessing in disguise because it became an intellectual challenge. And I started studying a little more seriously. But as the luck would have it, the winner was unfortunately murdered by his own supporters after a few months of taking charge. And I was forced to become president according to the constitution of the union and BHU at that time. Otherwise, union will be banned for a year. And so even those who protested against me, my candidature, who campaigned against me, came and begged that, look, we're very sorry. So it was some kind of a justification for my being there. But when I became president, my sociology was fresh in my mind, and I was a little more eager than an average union president. So there was a campaign to democratize the campus life. There used to be a system of permanent headship, permanent deanship,
Oh my God.
and no rotation system, no promotion system. There was also no participatory system for students to engage in the life of their own classroom in your hostel management and other things. And it was a time of democratization. All over the world, there was demand by the students for, it was an era of student power in Europe, in America, the famous 60s.
Right.
In my own country at that time, there was a campaign for education reforms. There was famous Kothari Commission report which had come out in 66. And it had attracted attention of everybody. It was the new national consensus. And I took a few suggestions of Kothari Commission recommendations, and I was a product of a language movement. So I also pushed for removal of compulsory English papers from social sciences, humanities, enlarged the classroom. So I asked them why we need such 20 seats in MA mathematics. What do you need to learn mathematics? A blackboard and a brilliant teacher. And mathematics teachers were also very happy. Oh, here is a student who is asking for our expansion. I said, oh, what about Hindi? How many teachers are needed and how many laboratories? I can understand medicine and technology to be dependent upon laboratory facilities and they need money. But other subjects, there should be evening session. There should be university without walls, correspondence courses, learning while earning so that poverty doesn't become a barrier between you and your quest for knowledge. So all these were popular demands and they were accepted also. But then with our foolish pressures and also some behind the door maneuvering, we came into a deadlock and I was expelled along with 35 other student leaders of all shades of politics, from Vidyarthi Parishad to Student Congress, including, except for the CPI supporters and CPM supporters. Then, of course, as it happened, I got time to find some books in jail. I was put in jail for being a troublemaker. So I learned for a whole year about sociology from books without any access to classroom. I was banned from the university. Anyway, let me cut this story short and I tell you that after a year of protest activities, we were allowed to appear in the exam, but we had to express regret for violence which had taken place in the process of our mobilization in support of our demands. And surprisingly for me as well as for everybody, I topped the class without attending a day lecture for a whole year.
Okay.
I was the gold medalist and no permission to do research. So what do I do now? I had great support from my friends and my family to explore wherever I could go. And JNU was just on the horizon. It was the first batch of MA MPhil students. MA was yet to start, MPhil students. And there was an advertisement. JNU was established with very young faculty members, and they were all very positive people. They mostly had their own contribution to public life through their engagements. So, without looking into my background, which was quite troublesome because I had also campaigned against Indira Ji, who was the prime minister at that time. And one of the reasons for my expulsion from BHU was that I had gone with a group of students to campaign against Indira Ji in Raebareli election in 1971 in support of Sri Raj Narayan, the socialist candidate. So, of course, and our vice chancellor was a Congress leader, Sri Kalulalji Shrimali, who was minister of Jawaharlal Nehru ji's cabinet. And after retiring from politics, he had become academician. So there was clear politicization of our campus life, and anybody who was anti-Indira at that time, 71, 72, 73, was a total no-no, as if I become anti-Modi these days. There was a hegemonic presence of Indira Ji with a great progressive image, and she had taken some progressive steps like nationalization of bank, rejecting the commitment of privy purse to the princes, land for homeless people in the villages. So Indira Ji was all over. And at the same time, I got admitted in JNU because JNU did not care in those times about the political color of the applicant. They only cared for your academic credentials and your academic inclination. And I already had a list of published articles because, as I told you, I was inclined intellectually. So I used to write articles, and in those times, Writing articles as a graduate student was quite a remarkable indicator of your potential. And
mm,
I had published in major publications like Dharmyog, Dinman,
mm,
Aaj, etc., etc. So in the board, when I was invited to appear, I was having a tough competition because nearly every other candidate was either a first divisioner or a gold medalist or a public education student. I'm thankful to my teachers, Yogen Singh, TK Oman, and others, that they looked at my CV, that did not care for my movement background, my being a jailbird, and I was admitted in JNU. When I came to JNU, it was like academic heaven because they were all growing. They were evolving their own strategy because they had competition with this great banyan tree called Delhi University and
mm,
great master called M.N. Srinivas and his school. So they had to grow under the shadow of a banyan tree. What do you do to make yourselves recognizable when there is already a great tradition of Delhi University compared with Bombay University, parallel with Lucknow University people?
right, right. Mm,
So there was an atmosphere of partnership, and we were a group of 6 students in MPhil class. I had come to BHU in search of my intellectual identity, and I moved from science to social science. But I came to JNU with quite a self confident engagement with sociology. I knew that sociology is it. If you want to make sense of your times, you better read as much as you can. So there was a passion. In BHU, there was pressure.
mm,
But in JNU, and the atmosphere was so creative because the teachers themselves
mm,
will encourage you to ask questions. If the class is silent, they'll feel offended. They'll encourage you to be interrogative, to be
mm,
critical, to be doubting. And particularly, I was totally disillusioned with established frames like Marxism, socialism, capitalism. And I wanted to know what next. And in the atmosphere, there was voice of Jayaprakash Narayan. There were writings of student radicals of Europe, um, Daniel Cohn-Bendit, Tariq Ali. They were all questioning not only capitalism but also Marxism.
mm,
There was a revival of interest in Marxism with a bit of caution.
mm,
So there was this New Left movement. New Left Review was being published from England,
mm,
and this was all happening around the world, but as if it was just behind the hostel room or inside the library of JNU, because JNU was a melting pot of ideas. JNU was a meeting point of perspectives. And people like us who came there with open mind and open ears and open eyes felt rejuvenated.
mm,
Uh, Now, when we came to JNU, there was the first barrier of establishment. There were many people who were known Indiraji personally. There were some people who were part of her core team of intellectual advisors as Rajya Sabha member, as like our own Vice Chancellor, Sri Parsarthi,
mm,
was a college senior of Indiraji in her London days. And was a man of substance, 20 years permanent representative of our nation in the United Nations. He was a very proud and very passionate Indian, but very pro establishment.
mm,
On the other hand, we had teachers who had communist background, who had served Communist Party as whole timers. And they were all still very communist in their understanding. And it was time of romance between communists and Indira Gandhi's Congress.
mm,
Few teachers were there, like Professor Yogen Singh, Professor TK Uman, who had their own engagement with Gandhi, not as Gandhian, but as students of Indian society and culture who wanted to look at the realities through Gandhian lens also.
mm,
And this all came to us as an open opportunity. And every other day, there'll be a giant walking into the seminar rooms of social sciences or humanities or total JNU. So from Gunnar Middle
mm,
to Rudolph's, every week there'll be a festival of ideas. big debates. So we were in an environment of learning. I must say it was celebration of ideas and festival of learning in those years of jail. That also connected with student politics. We wanted the campus to be as democratic as possible, and that made us question everything, including the established student organizations. It created a scope for me because there were not many socialists. I was myself very doubtful about my own commitment with the socialist leaders of that time, Madhulima, George Fernandez, Rajnaran, Karpuri Thakur, because I considered them failing socialists, parliamentary socialists, not true to their promises because they had been in power for a brief period of 67 to 69 and they did not do remarkably well. Indiraji was promising many things, but as we were very close to the realities, we thought it was more show than substance. So, what next? There was Naxalism in Bengal. Already 69 had taken place, and this was 72, 73. There was return of Trotsky in the international left ideological debates. There was discovery of Gramsci. There were stories of Che Guevara. And of course, there was a new interest in Gandhi. And I was coming from Benares, not very Marxist city, not very radical city, but very political place, very progressive place. And this made me take initiative and go beyond the available channels like Youth Congress, SFI, All India Student Federation. These were three organizations on the campus. My friends were interested in collective activities, but not in the structured way. So, what next now? Well, we must intervene, and we must intervene systematically. You have been president of Student Union at BHU. You are not a party worker. You are disillusioned. You are more critical of your own party than others. So, how about you giving us some time? I said, look, I am already a bit hurt. I was expelled from one university. You want me to be expelled from another university? No way. Don't push me. But as it happens, solidarity, friendship, courage, and a few ambitions, I became agreeable to become candidate of Student Union politics. We established a group called Free Thinkers. Why Free Thinkers? I suggested the name because I thought that, how can you be youth without mind? And if your mind is there, it has to be a thinking mind, not a regimented mind, not automatic obedience, critical thinking. This was the mood of the nation. We were not going to listen to Prime Minister and trust her. We were not going to listen to Professor and trust him or her. We had to have our own judgment, our own evaluation. So let's call a group called Free Thinkers, and it was received very well.
Who were the other members at that time in Free Thinkers?
Some of them became later on great scholars, a few great bureaucrats, a few also great writers. So to begin with, in my team, when I contested for the student union election, there was one Shashi Shekharji. He is now in Cornell. He was in School of Languages. He was our general secretary. In the council, there was N. Rajaram, who retired as Dean of Social Sciences at National University, Gujarat. We had Sindhu Shri Rao, who retired as Foreign Secretary. She was another councillor. We had Asif Ibrahim, who retired as Director General of CBIB. He was a gold medalist of Aligarh University. We had Jayant Prasad, who retired as ambassador of Afghanistan and Nepal and many other places. Incidentally, we also had the present-day foreign minister, Sri Jaishankar. He was greenhorn. He was among the volunteers of Free Thinkers at that time. So, in the formation of Free Thinker, we had Yogesh Sharma, who later became a good medieval historian.
Hmm.
Pramod Kishore Das, who retired as Professor of Economics from Bhubaneswar. Many people, Nagesh Hegde, he retired as editor of one of the magazines of Deccan Herald School group of publications in Karnataka. Birinder Pal Singh, who retired as dean at Patiala, Punjabi University, Patiala. It was a big group
Hmm.
where young men and women exploring new spaces, rechecking old ideas and theories, but all committed for academic excellence.
Hmm.
And free thinkers became a meeting point of, in a way, searching minds. And given our own way of doing things, we had quite a success, though in the first year. I was not elected. I lost the election for presidency by a few votes.
Hmm.
And our friend Prakash Karat, who was by then a very established emerging star of young Marxist, because he had come from England
Hmm.
and was part of a young team working with A.K. Gopalanji.
Hmm.
And there was already a tradition of communist link within the campus. There were a few very respected scholars who were well known Marxists also. And they were also part of the system. They were dean, director, head, professor. So there was a mix of attraction to be a Marxist in those days at JNU. One was for Marx, Marx, the great author, the great philosopher who gave us the theory of class struggle. But there was also a hidden story of Marks. If you write in the Marxist language, you will get preference, a subtle preference, because of course, if I'm a committed intellectual, I
Right.
have a weakness for my line of thinking. So there was a Guru Shishya Parampara everywhere, including JNU. So Marxist teacher will prefer not an anti-Marxist student. And
Right.
then there were a few teachers who were open-minded. You could not place them, you could not bracket them, but they were scholars of the first order. So it was a tension in the academic culture of JNU. And that tension was very helpful for us because we wanted to study Marx, but without party directions, without party line. We wanted to question Marx, which was not very easy if you are having a very dedicated, committed Marxist teacher. So, to make it a smaller story, free thinkers became a very acceptable alternative to very well organized, very clearly defined frame of ideas. And there was always very uncomfortable situation in classroom because there were many students who were for change, but they were not very sure that communist way, the Russian model or the Chinese, they were the two models at that time in the 70s, or the Indira model that was also very popularly acceptable and promoted model. These are the models because we found fallacies, we found fictions.
Hmm.
We were students, we were not party workers. And in sociology, there was already a great body of literature about Marx and around Marx. We had Max Weber, we had Durkheim, we had Parsons, we had C. Wright Mills, and then there was new left tradition.
Right.
We had Althusser, we had Polanza, we had Gramsci. So we knew that it is not 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. There is 2 plus 2 plus x.
Right.
And that x has to be defined and determined by reference to time, people, and processes. And that's where I found my space.
The very next year, you were elected president from Free Thinkers Party, right?
Yes, what happened next year was that uh, because I was now a recognized face and I was supposed to be number two in the campus student hierarchy, president and then so called leader of opposition. So this responsibility came my way, but I was already very deep into a
Huh.
student movement of the country. And
Hmm.
on the horizon was Jayaprakash Narayan.
Hmm.
and on the surface was Bihar movement.
mm,
And there was news about, it was 18th March 74. I can remember the dates. We were in the dining hall, and at the national television, there was a big television in the dining hall. There was this news that, oh, today there was a rally of students in Patna before the secretariat. There was firing, and a few people have been shot and injured, and there is curfew imposed in Patna. And we were all listening to the news while taking our dinner. And as it was in JNU those days, everybody got very excited because we had quite a few students from Bihar, even in those times.
mm,
And we said, let us have a meeting after dinner. And this was not my initiative. This was initiative of the leaders of the union who were with SFI, AISF. And we had a meeting. And as it was expected, we decided next day we will go and protest in front of Home Minister's office against firing. There must be inquiry, and the idea of Chhatra Ekta Jindabad. So
mm,
next day we took JNU bus, and after lunch, as it was JNU culture, that throughout the day you study, but after lunch you must also get outside the campus. Even if you want to go to Connaught Place for a cup of coffee or Bengali market, but no, 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 not round the clock in JNU. That is unhealthy.
mm,
So we went to protest, and it was a combined protest. I was one of the speakers at the protest rally because they all respected my location, and I had known Patna for a few years because I was there again and again for debates and other things. My friends in Samajwadi Yujan Sabha were there in Patna. And by April, Jayaprakash Narayan moves in. And when JP moves in, I feel very vindicated because I had attended his meeting, which he had organized at Gandhi Peace Foundation in December 73.
mm,
And interestingly, I was invited to that meeting by my teachers who had known JP personally, and they thought that a young man like me must go and listen to JP. I was not very interested in JP's way of thinking at that time because JP was our family hero, but he
mm,
was very soft by my standards. He was not accusing anybody for any problem. He was always accusing himself and the time, and he was emphasizing constructive work and Gandhi and non-violence
mm,
and Gram Swaraj. I mean, terms which were making no sense to a university activist like me. But as teachers asked me, and it was a Sunday, so I did go to Gandhi Peace Foundation, and I heard JP, not very impressed, but still very anxious that what next. And JP comes out in April and gives a call to students to join in a quest for change, but not in a sporadic manner, but give your 1 year,
mm,
not less than 1 year. And I had already completed my coursework. I was in the middle of writing my thesis. So I had time, I had money also, I had a fellowship. So I decided to join the movement. JP arranged a meeting in Patna of activists. And this was all before I became president of the student union. He made me responsible to visit Haryana and report to him about Haryana ground realities, which was under very difficult circumstances. So when the next time came, I was not very involved in the campus politics. And in the meanwhile, our friend Prakash Karath had become National President of Student Federation of India.
right.
A great honor
Mm,
for someone from JNU to become national president. I approached Prakash and I suggested that union should support Bihar protest because union was already in it. Prakash had his political problem. He said that, look, JP is not very careful about picking allies, and Vidyarthi Parishad and Jansangh are supporting the movement. I said, no, 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 it is Vidyarthi Parishad and Jansangh who were part of the protest. JP is supporting the movement.
mm,
So we cannot blame JP for presence of BJP, not BJP at that time, Socialist or Jansangh or others. He has decided his own strategy and he's asking all of us to leave our political affiliations. But Prakash had his own problems. He said that I sympathize with you, but I cannot promise. And in the meanwhile, ABVP had won the seat of Presidentship of Delhi University. Sri Arun Jaitley had become president.
Okay.
So it was needed that there is something other than ABVP also in Delhi. Where do we find one? And I became the focus again, and I, under very difficult circumstances, had to go for contesting. And when I contested, it was not me versus Prakash Karat. It was not Free Thinkers versus SFI. It was Bihar movement versus SFI. And the mandate was in favor of student protest and engaging with JP, because there was Gujarat Navnirman movement which had succeeded. There was now Bihar burning, and there was protest in the air. So I got the mandate. Prakash was defeated, which became a big national news because Prakash was president of Student Federation of India. So I did not emerge as the winner. He was considered to be the loser. And it was also a mandate for JP Boy. I was
Yeah.
presented as supporter of Bihar movement. And that made me very engaged. Uh, Here I was finishing my thesis. There I was attending meetings of coordination committee in Muzaffarpur and Patna and Hisar in Delhi city. It was very thick life. And there, as I told you, my dream of understanding situation with help of my books became more and more true. And there were some very lovely booksellers on the campus, only two. One was a communist Dada, and there was another one. They'll give you books for free. They'll say, Abhi paise ka charcha mat karo. Take it, read it. I hear that you have not understood Marx very well, or there's a book called Prison Notebooks. I said, what do I do with prison notebooks, Baba? I must not read it. I have other. नहीं नहीं भैया तुम ले जाओ देखो मजा आएगा पढ़ोगे बताओगे. And then it became much more preferred book. Or there is a translation of Gora from Sahitya Academy. अरे भाई गोरा को क्यों पढ़ना है? You are doing Yogen Singh na? Check it. He will recommend it to you to read Gora before you read other books on modernity. So everywhere you got feedback, you got ideas, you got suggestions. And in this process, I also got idea of appearing for the National Fellowship to study abroad. I must tell you, because that shows the value of friendship in growing up. One day, a friend of ours was about to go to America. So after dinner, we had to go and see him off. And while I was hugging him to say happy journey, he whispers in my ear that, Anand, you are much more deserving than I was. Why don't you try? This is a very interesting fellowship. I said, look, Sanjeev, this is not my cup of tea. Yaar. You are a very bookish fellow, so you got it, not me. No, no, Anand, you must try. And next week I go and I inquire from Ministry of Education about this facility. And I find that, yes, I'm a legitimate candidate for it. I apply for it. And after a few weeks, I get an interview call. And here I am in the middle of a protest movement against the government of India. But when I go to face the board is full of so-called left of the center intellectuals. And they select me after asking very rough questions, including, what is the contribution of Yogen Singh in sociology according to you? And I came back and I complained to Yogen Singh ji. I said, sir, what kind of people are they? Why do they ask such questions? And then Yogen Singh, as usual, was very happy. He said, Acha, did they ask this question? Oh, he's a very personal friend of mine. And he makes such questions to make you uncomfortable. What did you say? I said, sir, I didn't know. What is your contribution so far? I have read some of your articles and I have been your student. आपने ठीक किया. मेरा क्या contribution अभी sociology में है? अभी तो बहुत काम करना बाकी है. That is 73, 74 Yogen Singh. This national fellowship gave me chance to meet my expectations in a full fledged manner, because America, University of Chicago Sociology Department was the first Sociology Department, first of all, was created at Chicago. It was the first university in the world to have a formal department of sociology. And I had read some material of some of the scholars who had worked there, Bernard Cohen, Milton Singer,
mm,
Malcolm Marriott, Rudolph. So I got admitted at Chicago, and that created a tragic situation at JNU because I had to leave my presidentship halfway. I could be president only for a semester. It is a two-term system. You are elected for 1 year, and I had to go. I had to also go halfway from the movement because movement has by that time uh, reoriented itself because Indiraji challenged Jayaprakash ji that
mm,
why dissolve Bihar Assembly on the lines of Gujarat? Elections are round the corner. Why don't you confront us in People's Court and suspend your movement and come, let us settle with the help of people? And JP, being a genuine Democrat, said that's a very agreeable proposition. And he asked all of us to either return to our classes or to go to the villages and let the field be managed now by political parties. And he advised political parties to prepare for the elections, which never took place because in the middle of the whole process, emergency was imposed and elections were postponed in Bihar as well as Lok Sabha elections were postponed for 1 year.
mm,
So when I heard this change of strategy, I went and asked him for his permission. I said, look, I do not belong to a family where I can become a whole timer. I have to finish my studies. And JP himself had gone through that journey because after 1921 non-cooperation movement,
right.
when he had left his studies, he went to Bihar Vidyapit to complete his intermediate. And as the movement went into a lull, Gandhiji was arrested for 6 years. He decided to complete his study and went to America. So he appreciated, my friends did not, some of the other leaders also appreciated. They said, let him go finish his studies. When he comes back, he'll be useful for us. When I went to Chicago, that was January 75, um, immediately I was asked by my friends at Chicago, few of them former JNU students, to tell us what is the ground situation at the fields in the campuses.
Mm,
This also got me to go to some other campuses, nearby campuses, to explain about because campuses have this culture of inviting people for seminars, lectures, and for me, I was in a mixed situation. I wanted to contribute to the movement, but I also wanted to complete my studies. So this all created a situation where we established a group called Indians for Democracy
at
to
Chicago.
support, yes, to support JP movement and protest movement of India for better democracy. And this created a small network. In the meanwhile, by June, this was all happening in April and May. By June, emergency was imposed in India.
Mm,
Good for us that we had a structure and we had a system. We had a small network in the making. And I had already spoken at Chicago and in nearby campuses about the threat to democracy because Indiraji had a very positive image in America. Indiraji had a great support
mm,
from the left wing. All the radicals in American campuses took Indiraji as an icon of progressive politics of the third world because she had snubbed Nixon about Vietnam War.
mm,
She had rejected uninvited visit of Dr. Henry Kissinger, who was the kingmaker of that time. So Indiraji had a radical image, and to speak about Indiraji's problems was always very difficult. Indians were taking it as an unpatriotic act, and progressive intellectuals were thinking that we are too ideological, very blind.
mm,
People like Rudolph and many others, not only Rudolph's, because they thought it to be their duty to be defending India and Indira Gandhi
mm,
in a very hostile atmosphere, CIA, America, capitalism, American corporations. But when emergency was imposed, I was capable of mobilizing people. Within 24 hours, we rushed to Washington, D.C. with a few dozen supporters protesting against emergency. And it was shocking for the embassy very uh, exciting for American media that, oh, there is such a network and they are so alert that, and they are all students or professionals, they are not really, um, weightless people. So we had news coverage from day one. My lecture was arranged. I went to around 27 universities and cities
Hmm.
to explain about the problem of emergency and tragedy of Indira Gandhi's politics and genuineness of JP and the R movement. And soon I was warned by the embassy to
Hmm.
stop my speaking and writing. And I said, this is very difficult. I cannot stop it because I know JP and you know JP. T.N. Call, uncle of Indiraji, Mama,
Hmm.
was ambassador. He was very furious.
Hmm.
And when they inquired from the university said that what is your problem because this young man is having all good grades, A minus on an average, and he's one of the best students we have from your country. But they said, no, 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 we have to deport him, we have to cancel his fellowship. So they canceled my scholarship.
Oh.
And I became a penniless person. They canceled my scholarship. They advised the university to cancel my admission
Hmm.
and asked to deport me. But thanks to the student solidarity, the Student Union of Chicago
Hmm.
University rallied behind me. They demanded my defense and support. There was a committee created to defend me from getting deported, but that's all very personal.
And if one can put it in one single phrase, it will be like accomplishing the status of a troublemaker, sociologist troublemaker everywhere.
Yes, you are very right that,
Uh,
a young student becoming a troublemaker in three campuses
yeah.
was something very amazing for me. And I look at myself and I said, no, it was not me. It
Hmm.
was the times.
हाँ,
ये मौके की नज़ाकत थी कि
जी.
आपको
Hmm.
उन्होंने इतना इम्पोर्टेंट माना कि चाहे बीएचयू में एक्सपेल किया, चाहे जेएनयू में प्रेसिडेंट बनाया या शिकागो में स्कॉलरशिप कैंसिल किया.
Hmm.
So at a very young age, I became fairly known because there was a headline in Times of India when we captured the President House. राष्ट्रपति भवन में हम लोग घुस गए बीएचयू का सवाल लेकर के.
हाँ.
8 घंटा वहां पर धरना चलता रहा
Hmm.
और वीवी गिरी जी राष्ट्रपति थे.
Hmm.
उनका बड़प्पन देखिए कि हम लोग को पहले तो वहां से जेल भेजा, 3 दिन बाद जब छूटे
Hmm.
तो अगले दिन राष्ट्रपति ने हम लोग को मिलने के लिए बुलाया. आज
अच्छा.
आप सोच नहीं सकते हैं.
Hmm.
सच अ कमिटेड डेमोक्रेटिक लीडरशिप.
Hmm.
शिकागो में जब हमारी स्कॉलरशिप कैंसिल हुई, so next day I had a call from New York Times. I did not know anybody anywhere. And within 48 hours, there was a front page story in New York Times
Hmm.
about how government of India is behaving foolishly. A young graduate student who is supposed to be a brilliant student according to the university standards and grade sheet is being asked to go home because he is not caring for his studies. So, yes, by 26, 25, 26, I had become fairly satisfied with my public life
Hmm.
and with my academic journey because I had a gold medal and expulsion order from BHU. I had a fellowship, MPhil degree from JNU,
Hmm.
and I had now national fellowship, which was then cancelled
Hmm.
to study abroad at Chicago.
Hmm. So probably that was the reason why in your kind of political sociology, we hear a very different kind of flexibility, very different kind of approach to issues, which is about accommodating variety of perspectives, which is
Yes, see, I think that given my own engagement and learning process, you have to be open ended.
hmm,
Unless uh, you want to be engaged in making material for dustbin,
hmm,
because you may write something very powerful in terms of language and style, but substance requires
hmm,
engagement with reality, and reality is ever changing.
hmm.
Reality is so unpredictable.
True.
Reality is so multivariate.
Hmm,
And as I told you, I started from BHU via JNU. When I went to Chicago, I found Chicago was also not sufficient because at that time a star was emerging on the horizon of sociology, Immanuel Wallerstein.
Right.
And Wallerstein was teaching in a very remote state university called SUNY Binghamton, State University of New York, Binghamton. I asked my supervisor at Chicago that I have completed my coursework. I want your permission to study for one semester. Yeah.
And supervisor was?
My supervisor was Professor Morris
Oh,
Janowitz. Morris Janowitz was a famous political sociologist because he had written a famous book called American Soldier.
okay.
He was not my thesis supervisor. Like JNU, every year you get a new supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
So Professor Morris Janowitz was heard me and he smiled at me like a wise old man, smiling at a foolish young man. He said, "Your government must be crazy to fund you to study at SUNY Binghamton when you are already studying at Chicago. What will you get at SUNY Binghamton?"
Mm-hmm.
Because they were at that time not very respectful of world system theory. They were
Okay.
still into Parsonian or C. Wright Mills or Baltimore type of models, or at best Marxist.
Mm.
So when I called and I checked with Professor Wallerstein, his friend Professor Hopkins said, "Most welcome next semester." And there I go and I study with Professor Ramkrishna Mukherjee, who was teacher of my supervisor at JNU, Partho Mukherjee. I study with Giovanni Arrighi. I study with Petrus, James Petrus, a hardcore Marxist. And of course, I'm a student of Professor Immanuel Wallerstein.
Mm.
So, and they are all having multiple interpretations of the same reality. So, as you said, when I got the chance to teach and to supervise your generation of scholars, I wanted them to enjoy
Mm.
the, the freedom to explore things from through many lenses, and at the same time suffer the tension
Right.
of uncertainty. Because if 2 plus 2 is between 3.5 and 4.5, sir, how do I decide whether it is 3.5 or 4 or 4.5? And I leave it to him or her that it has to be your judgment based upon your facts. Let you have a dialogue with reality
Mm.
and don't go with closed eyes and closed ears. Then what is the fun of it?
Mm-hmm.
So the pain of creating knowledge is pleasure of the profession of being an academician. Is
Very.
like being a mother. How can you not have pain in creating something new out of the available factors? Otherwise, you will be creating something dead.
Mm.
So you are very right that my journey made me. I did not read basic elementary undergraduate text of sociology because at that time I was reading chemistry and geology.
Right. Right.
So my ignorance became my asset.
Mm-hmm.
I could, it's like a foolish man walking into a firing field. You did not know where the guns are coming from, where the bullets are coming from. You
Right.
just walked into it in an innocent, idiotic manner.
Mm.
And good luck to you that you did not die and you could collect some wisdom out of it.
Mm. So, how do you reflect? I'm sure you are getting to hear about what sociologists do these days in various universities across India. What do you think of? What are where are we headed? How do you look at us?
Well, I have been trained in the model of continuity and change.
Right.
And I believe that I must not be very arrogant in making judgments without knowing the total picture. I do have some idea because, as with your help and help of many of your contemporaries, I was able to work as a volunteer of Indian Sociological Society, organizing their conferences and conducting their programs as secretary, president. So I do have some idea. I have been also visiting professor of many universities,
Mm.
and I do get feedback in the form of thesis coming from various universities, state universities, central universities, north, south, east, west. I must say that there is opening of mind. There is desire to do better than the previous generations, and there is critical faculty alive and growing. But there is also much anxiety about security.
Mm.
This search of security is very suicidal. because the engagement with the unknown has to be a risky proposition. Otherwise, you should be a bureaucrat. You
Exactly.
know the rules, you know the precedents, there is a file noting, there is also, or you should be a judge, not a sociologist.